Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our very first virtual workshop. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. This is going to be super, super exciting. I know I've been saying this for the last 15 minutes or so, but I am popping a link into the chat. This is a link to all of the materials that we're going to be working through in today's workshop. There's a pretty big download in there, so just be aware that it might take a few minutes for your computer to process that. We are going to be recording this chat, so if you're unable to follow along with us right now, feel free to take a step back, kind of absorb what we're talking about, and then jump back into the code along once everything downloads. Barb, who's our speaker, I'm going to introduce in a second, was also saying how she is available after she runs a question and answer group. So I will share that information with you all as well. So again, super exciting. This is an awesome, awesome program. I'm so happy that everyone is here today, and I cannot wait to get started. But before we do, and I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible because I want to make sure we have time for everything, I want to go through a couple of quick housekeeping items. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing and Community for PowerToFly. We host these chats every day, almost every day. And I'm so excited to be here with you all, chatting with you and going through obviously some amazing, amazing topics today, especially. I think this is a really, really interesting topic and cool workshop that we're doing today. So with that being said, the point of this is to make this entire chat a conversation. Stop us if you have questions. Feel free to write things in the chat, come off mute, join us on camera, so we can virtually network and help each other work through some of these problems or questions. That's what we're here to act as a community, and we're so excited to have you here with us today. With that being said, everyone is muted by default. You have the ability to unmute yourself, so just be aware that you have that capability. You also have the capability to to put yourself on video. So just be aware of that as well. We obviously love to see you if we can. But if you're obviously in your office or what have you and can't put your video on, no worries. Okay, so the star of the show. I am so excited to introduce Barbara Donnie. Sorry, is that correct? Okay. To our chat and learn stage today. So Barbara, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about your background, why you're here chatting with us today, and then we'll dive right into the coding.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to apologize. I'm getting over a cold for those of you that missed me saying that 5-10 minutes ago. So I don't normally sound like this. So pardon the voice, but that's right. I'm a statistician, data analytics expert. I have a bachelor's in statistics, and I've worked in insurance, and I worked for a statistical consulting company previously. And now I do my own statistical consulting through my company called Boxplot. And we do just kind of general consulting, and then also video chat-based consulting as well. And I'm super excited to be doing this with PowerToFly. I've actually given this Python seminar before, and people seem to like it, so hopefully you guys will like it too. We're actually going to be making really awesome visualizations in Python, and you have all the code and the answer keys in there too if anybody gets stuck.
Awesome. And a quick question in the chat. Are we supposed to download Anaconda for Python 2.x or 3.x? 3.x. So Valerie, hope that answers your question. Awesome. So I am going to stop sharing and let you take over.
Okay, great. So hopefully, I know it sounds like some people are still downloading, but I'm going to share my screen. You should have a folder that looks like this. Once you do finish, so you download the materials and then download Anaconda. So ideally, you want all these files in the same folder. So all the two CSV files, and then obviously, try not to look at the answers unless you're stuck, but the answers are there in case you do get stuck, and then the actual notebook itself, and then the setup instructions, which you've already seen. And then to get to Jupyter Notebook, you should, if you're on a Mac, you would open up a terminal window like this, and I'll exit out of mine so you can see it. You should see something, give it a second, like that, and then I'm going to close out of it so you can see it actually open. And then you would type just Jupyter Notebook, and it'll open up in a browser tab. If you're on a PC, you have to go to Start, Anaconda, like open up the program, and then click the Jupyter Notebook icon. And then you want to get to the folder that has all the documents in it. So I put mine on my desktop. You might have to click, desktop and whatever to get to the folder that's there. I'm going to pause here for a second and check Zoom. Is anybody having trouble with getting to this part?
I'll watch the chat too, Barb, in case there are any questions. Emily says, nope, she's got it. Good.
So then you'll open up the IPython notebook file, IPYNB extension here, and you should see this. Hopefully everybody can get to that point. So what we're going to do, and I'll just kind of talk a little bit while people are still trying to load this. And I know my voice sounds so bad. I'm so sorry, guys. I don't normally sound like this. So we're going to do a bunch of different plots in Python. There's going to be some things that you see in here that you're like, well, where'd that come from? Sometimes I'll put them in there, and sometimes I'll briefly explain them. But like I said, I'm available for questions afterward. Some of this stuff, just because it's an hour, can't go over every single thing. Like, we're going to merge two tables, for example. We could do a whole additional seminar on merging tables, but obviously no time. So we're just going to kind of go through some of those things and then really focus in on the visualizing and the plotting. So what we're going to use a couple of libraries in Python. So right now, Jupyter Notebook, by the way, is just a way of running Python. And then we're going to use some libraries in Python that are specific to data analytics and visualization. And we're going to make charts like this. So you should be able to scroll down and see the first cell. This is called a cell in Jupyter Notebook. And there's advantages and disadvantages to this. And I know this was one of the questions that came in. So I'll kind of address it now. And then if you have follow-up questions about it, let me know. But this is a cell-based editor. So I can run the cells in any order I want. That sounds great, but there's disadvantages too, because if you forget that you ran something, you might overwrite a variable or something like that. So there's advantages and disadvantages to this versus the other options. But it is really great for visualizing because you can see it right there. It is, I think it's probably the platform of choice for most data scientists. So that's why we're using Jupyter Notebook. So to run a cell, you just click inside of it and go Shift, Enter. Hold down Shift and hit Enter. You shouldn't see anything happen when you run this cell, and that's okay. This is just importing the 3 libraries that we need to make the visualizations. And then we're also just setting some options here just to make the visualizations appear a little bit nicer and right in line in the rest of the, like right here in the editor. Hopefully everyone's good so far. Again, you can stop with questions. Now we're going to import the files. If you're following along, now is where you're going to have to change some code. Obviously, you can't leave path to your file. If you put all of these in the same folder, you actually don't need any path at all. You should be able to just type production.product.csv. And I think this one is actually sales order detail. It is. Sorry, I forgot the sales in there. So it should look like this. This is how you import data into pandas. The separator is tab. Even though it's a CSV file, that doesn't always mean it's comma separated, believe it or not. I know it's tricky, but this one is actually tab separated. So /T stands for tab in this case. And in this one, we're only importing the first 1,000 rows because it's a really big table. By the way, this is the AdventureWorks database. It's a free database put out by Microsoft for people to practice with. So that's what we're using. And it's just fake sales and products for a fake bicycle store. That's the context. So before we run this, we also want to merge the 2 tables so we can work with them together later on. So if you're going to follow along with me, we're going to type joined equals, and that's how you just assign a variable in Python. It's so easy. Name of the variable equals and whatever you want. And it's going to be pd.merge. This PD stands for pandas. Remember, that's how we imported pandas up here. Merge is a command of the pandas library. It's a method in the pandas library. And then we'll say we want to merge the sales table And remember, we called it sales up here, and then comma, the products table, which we named PROD up here. And then you have to tell it, how do you want to join this? This is like a join in SQL. For anyone who's familiar with SQL, we're going to say how equals left. It'll be a left join. And then you have to give it an on. What column? Just like you do in SQL. Product ID. This is case sensitive. So it's capital P for product and then capital I, capital D. When you run this, you shouldn't see anything, right? Again, no output. We're just storing stuff right now. I know that's a lot, and I know it's painful to listen to my voice when I'm sick. Does anybody have questions so far? No? Okay. Let's make sure it went in correctly. So let's do the head command. The head command is how you can quickly see a snippet of a data frame in Python and in pandas. So we'll do sales.head, open close parentheses, and you can say how many rows you want to bring back inside the parentheses. So let's say I want to bring back the first 5 rows. I'll do a 5, and now I finally get output when I run something. And again, I'm hitting Shift Enter to run these cells. Okay, cool. So I've got the first 5 rows of my sales table. Then I can scroll and see the whole thing. I could do the same thing for the product table, rerun the cell, and now I see the first 5 rows of the product table. And then I can also do it for the joined data set. And I can see I've got a lot going on here. They're joined together. So far, so good. We're going to try a line plot first. Line plots are best when you want to plot a variable over time. So time should be on the x-axis. Well, we need to reformat the dates up here. So you might notice there's a couple dates, a cell start date, a cell end date, a discontinued date, but that's not really a great format for Python to recognize when we're trying to plot. So this cell, which I already gave you the code for, all you have to do is run it. It's going to create a new year column in this data frame, in the products data frame, that is going to be just the year of the cell start date. So let's run this. You shouldn't see any output. It's just doing it behind the scenes. But if you want to check that it worked, we can select both the cell start date and the year column that we just made to verify that it worked. So the way that you can do that in pandas, you can select 1 column or 2 columns. For 2 columns, you need double brackets. So we're going to do name of the data frame, which is prod, double brackets, and then in quotes, it'll be the year column that we just made and the cell start date. And pay attention to capitalization in Python, well, really in any programming language, but especially right now, you have to pay attention. It's usually case sensitive. So if I don't do this exactly the way it shows up in the database, it won't work. I think that's the number one reason people get errors is they have wrong spelling or missing a capitalization or something like that. So if I run this, and again, I'm just going to do the first 3 rows so that we don't get the whole thing back. You can see it worked, right? It's taking the year from this cell start date, and there's a new column called year in our products data frame that is just the year of the cell start date. And now we can count how many products are introduced each year. And then eventually we're going to plot that. So step 1 is kind of cleaning up your data. Step 2 is you have to get it in the right format. Every program is like this. Excel, Python, Tableau, they all want the data in a very specific format. In this case, it's got to be the x-axis and then the y-axis. So our x-axis is year, and then we want the y-axis to be the count by year. So this is, you can kind of think of what we're about to do next as like a pivot table. A little bit, you're aggregating the count by year. So we're going to say prod bracket year dot value counts, and the value counts is just a method that is built in that will just count based on what we give it before that. So we're giving it per year, and it's just going to count up all the rows per year. So if we run this, we get a nice nifty little table here that says, okay, 211 products were introduced in 2008, 136 were introduced in 2013, etc. But we can't plot yet, right? for our line plot, it has to be in order or else it's not going to make sense. So we're going to add a sort index at the end. And this is the really cool thing about Python. It's cool, but it's also something you have to get used to, is like you're kind of stacking things on top of each other. So first I started with my year column, right? And then I added on top of that the value counts. And now I'm going to add on top of the result of those two dot sort index, which is just going to sort based on the index, which in this case is the year, the first column. And now they're actually in order. If you can kind of get that idea down early, Python will become so easy, so much easier, I should say, for you. It's the idea of like you take one thing and then kind of add something to it and then take that result and tack on another command. You kind of have to picture what the result is along the way, just like we broke this down. Remember, I ran this without the sort first, and now I'm applying the sort to this intermediate thing. So it's kind of building as you go. Okay, great, and I'm not hearing any questions. Again, don't forget to unmute if you have questions, that's no problem. We're gonna add another layer to this so you can actually copy this whole thing, paste it into this cell below, and all you have to do is add dot plot on the end, and that's it. It'll take the data up here and plot it. And it's going to do a line plot because line plot is the default. We don't have to tell it line because line is the default. So if I run this, I get a line plot. If the product's introduced over time, we can see there's a pretty big dip here, right? So for some reason, they stopped introducing products around 2011, and then it starts picking up again. So this is plot number one. Hopefully everybody's kind of following along and there. I also gave you an example of a plot with different colors. I gave it because, again, I was concerned about time, and then also it's a little bit more challenging. There's a pivot table function in Python that works exactly like Excel. So if you're familiar with pivot tables in Excel, this is a great function for Python. There's a comparable function, excuse me, sorry, I'm still sick, called group by. And I find that one less intuitive. Some people like the group by function, but I think the pivot table is a little bit easier to work with. And it just, you give it the name of the data frame that you're using. By the way, when I'm saying data frame, that's just the table, the CSV file, right, that we pulled in the beginning. And then the values is just like the values box in Excel. The index is what you want your x-axis to be. So here we've got year. The columns are how do you want to split up the colors. This is exactly how you build a pivot table in Excel. And then you tell it what function do you want to apply, excuse me, to the table. Sorry, 1 minute.
You're okay, and no worries. And there's some questions in the chat about if this is being recorded and people who are having a little trouble catching up with the downloads. Yes, this is being recorded. So if you missed some steps at the beginning, unfortunately, you can't like go back while we're live, but I will try and get this up by the end of today, if not first thing tomorrow morning. So you will be able to follow along with Barb. And she was mentioning at the beginning of the call that she does like a live Q&A session that I'll be sharing the link to as well. So if you do have questions as you're going through this, perhaps on your own, or you have a friend who's going through it, she's happy to answer those during that Q&A. So no worries. But please, if you do have questions now, I'm watching the chat. So feel free to either message me privately or message everyone, and I can relay these questions to Barb with any issues that you're having.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm so sorry. I'm very
No, you're doing great. I'm so sorry you're sick. That's no fun. It's the worst time of year. I'm sure all of us on the call can relate.
worst. Great. And I'm sorry I didn't see those questions in the chat.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, now we'll move on to bar charts. So it's really easy to make a bar chart. It's actually the same exact data layout. And then we're just going to give it the argument kind equals bar, because now it's no longer a line plot, which is the default. So we'll come down here and we're going to start by selecting the color column. Does anybody want to take a guess based on what we did before? How would I select the color column? No guesses? All right, I'll give you guys this one. It's the same thing that we did up here where we selected the year column. So we can even copy and paste this. By the way, there's nothing wrong with copying and pasting. Coders do it all the time. They'll take somebody else's, copy paste to get going on the next thing. It's no problem. And I'm just going to change this to color. And it is a capital C. And then we're going to do value counts again. Dot value underscore counts. And if you run that, oops, did I forget something here? Oh, the S. You got to spell counts correctly. It'll give you the count of products for each color. This is the same setup that we had before. And then we could do a bar chart where the color is going to be the x-axis and the counts are going to be the y-axis. So we're going to take the code from up here and copy it and paste it down here. And then once again, we're just going to add dot plot at the end, but this time we have to do kind equals bar. And bar needs to be in quotes. Take note of that. And that's just the syntax that pandas and matplotlib, the libraries that we're using, that's just what they use. And then if you run that, you should see a bar chart with the number of products by color. And again, if it wasn't sorted, you could sort it up here, but it does sort by the numbers by default. Good. Any questions or comments so far? You can come off mute. Okay, let's move on to histograms.
Oh, someone said that their bar chart is very colorful.
Oh, I did just see that. Yes, so I think it's a difference in the pandas version. So I haven't updated pandas in a while because I've been using it for so long, but you guys probably just downloaded it, I'm guessing, right? And downloaded Python. So I think in the new version, it does different colors for each bar by default. Yeah. So
I was gonna ask that, like, is there a way to change the color? But clearly that's just like a program default.
No, you can change the color and colors later in the thing for scatterplots. Yeah.
Jumping ahead.
The excitement is good. So yeah, well, there's so many settings that you can apply to these charts. It's completely customizable for everything. The axes, the colors, the width of the bars, anything you can imagine is customizable for all of these graphs. Does anybody remember why or when you would use a histogram? No one remembers from stats class, or maybe you've used them at work? Okay, I see something coming in the chat. You can also call out over microphone. It's not quite comparing two variables. That's a scatter plot, but that's a good guess to show frequencies. That's closer, yeah. So a histogram is showing the distribution of a single quantitative variable, and right, it's the frequency of different bins of a variable. So let's take a look at a quantitative variable first, just to see what I mean. Let's look at the list price column. And again, you know, we're just going to select it the exact same way that we did before. Prod, bracket, list price. And because it's only one column, I only need single brackets. And you can apply the head, I think, to this if you want to just look at a little bit of it, but we can look at the whole thing. It's not going to show the whole thing anyway, but you know, it'll show the beginning and then the end of the column. So it's just a totally numeric column, like just a column of numbers. What if we just want to understand this column better? We don't need to know like list price by color like we did previously. We don't need it by any other variable. We just want to visualize it by itself. That's what a histogram is great for. You can just look at a variable by itself. Now, we need to know the minimum and the maximum values in the column so we can pick our bins for the histogram. There's a really neat describe method that will give you all these really cool metrics at once. We can get how many non-blank values there are in the column, the mean of the column, standard deviation, and then the minimum and the maximum. So the min and the max is like about 3,500, right? Maybe we want 10 bins in our histogram. 3,500 divided by 10 is about 350. So maybe we want a bin size of about 350. You could also just tell it the number of bins you want to. That's also an option. So let's just start by seeing what it produces though. You can literally just select the column. And if you haven't noticed the pattern by now, it's select the column and then do something to it. So we'll select the column and then dot hist for a histogram. And this is giving us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bins by default. Great. But like I said, we can change that if we want to. So I'm going to copy and paste the code from here down into here. And you have to do it a little bit differently this time. You have to actually go back to the plot method that we were using before and say kind equals hist, and then give it another argument of bins equals, let's do 15 this time. And now we get a histogram with smaller bins. So you can, like I said, this is all very customizable. It's really neat to be able to change all of this in pandas with relatively little code. And you'll see that this happens with scatter plots too. You have the option of a dot scatter or dot plot. And I think it's pulling from 2 different libraries, or it's doing something slightly different each time, but it'll produce the same exact result, whatever you choose. Someone asked, what does bin stand for? That's a great question. It's just the range that you're looking in. So for example, this bin is about 0 to 250. So there's 330-ish counts or products that have a list price between $0 and $250. And then there's only 50 products that have a price between $250 and $500. And that's how you'd interpret it. And usually you're not picking out a particular bar. For a histogram, you're looking at the shape of the whole thing. So this one is, and I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it's true, this is right skewed. And I know everyone wants to say it's left skewed because the bigger bars are to the left, but it's the opposite. This is right skewed because the tail goes off to the right. So this means that most of the products that this company sells are on the cheaper end. That's how I would interpret that graph. That's the business application of this graph. It's just kind of understanding the distribution of how much is charged for the products at Adventure Work Cycles. That's a great question. Okay, so like I was saying before with Lauren's question, you can modify any part of the chart. So here I gave you the code, you can just run it. We're back to a histogram with 10 bins, and now we've labeled the axes too. So you just add this plt.x label and plt.y label, and you can label the axes. They must be in the same cell as the plot itself. Like I can't run the plot and then in a whole new cell down here put the PLT. It's not going to know what I'm doing. It has to be in the same cell up here. Great. Okay. You can also make histograms of the entire data frame at once. Like let's say I wanted a histogram of the whole products table. I'll run this and it's going to give me this really cool matrix of histograms. But this is not all the columns in the products table. Does anybody know why some columns are missing? Emily's on the right track. It's because they're not numbers, right? It doesn't have to be an integer, but it does have to be a number column. So if it's text, exactly, Valerie, right? If it's text, it won't plot a histogram. You can't make a histogram from a text column. It doesn't make sense. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to leave the challenges for you guys, just I guess for the sake of time. And I also want to leave time for questions. I know there were a lot of them. So we'll come back to this if we have time or just something to do on your own. Let's move on to scatter plots. Scatter plots are tough for people. I know that they're a challenging graph, but they're so effective and they're so helpful if you get used to them. So we're actually going to do the scatter plot on the joined data frame. Remember, we merged the 2 data frames together and called it joined. So for a scatter plot, instead of calling the columns individually, you actually call the whole data frame and then dot plot on the whole data set. And then you say kind equals scatter, and you tell it the column names that you want for X and Y. So let's say we have a hypothesis for AdventureWorks. You know, you're an analyst at AdventureWorks, and you think that the higher the order quantity, the more money total that person spends when they place an order. That's what the line total is. It's the total amount that person spent overall. So you think that the more items they order, the higher the dollar amount will be for the order. Makes sense, right? We can see that's sort of true. If you run this, you should see the scatter plot. I mean, there's a pretty clear trend up here, but it doesn't really look that consistent. It's fanning out a little bit. Well, we can add another layer of complexity to this to try to see a color map, essentially, of why, in this case, it actually shows us why they're so different. But you can add an argument C. So let's grab the code from up here where we've got our X and our Y, and we'll say comma C equals list price. And the C is the color map. It's a scale that's applied to the dots based on this third variable, which is the price of the individual products being ordered. And then the fourth argument is, what do you want the color map to be? And in this case, we're going to do the winter theme. And when I've done this in the past, people are always asking me, what are the different options for the color themes? And I have them up here. In the documentation, you can see there's a bunch of autumn, cool, spring. They've got all these fancy names for the color schemes. But if you stick with winter, you'll see the chart, and it shows you the green are the more expensive items. This kind of makes sense, right? Because at first it might be like, well, why is there such a high order quantity here, but a low total price? Well, it's because this person is ordering really cheap items, whereas up here are the more expensive items. And it does make sense, right? The more expensive you get, the more the total of the order will be. Does that make sense to everybody? See, no one's been brave enough to call out over microphone yet. I see a yes in the chat. All right, great, great. And then again, you can add all these other really cool options, like S, I think, is the, if I remember correctly, the size of the points. Alpha is the transparency of the points, like so these are not transparent at all. These are a little bit more transparent. You could see they're a little bit more shaded. And then you could change the size of the figure. And then all of these are different options. And I know it might seem confusing where here, we're putting the options inside the parentheses, but up here, we put the options below the whole command. It does differ based on what the option is and what chart you're doing. And unfortunately, it's not super consistent. But the good news is Pandas actually has pretty good documentation on their website. And I've got several links to the documentation. I mean, here's a link, right within this notebook. Here's a couple links. So you can go look it up, and it's pretty good about telling you exactly what you need to do depending on what you're trying to do. And then Stack Overflow. If anyone has not heard of Stack Overflow, they're a great resource when you're trying to find code snippets for some specific thing that you're trying to do. And then finally, before we go into any additional plots, you can save these figures as PNG files on your computer so that you can put them in PowerPoint or whatever you want. So what we're going to do is, it's just like the like before, you have to have it in the same cell. So let's say I want to save this one. I have to put it down here, and then I'm going to say plt.savefig, and you don't have to give it a path unless you want to put it somewhere specific. I'm okay with it going in the same exact folder where we have everything else, which, if you remember, looks like this. So when I run this cell, it's going to save my figure in this folder, but I have to give it a name first. So I'm just going to call this test_scatterplot.png. And now if I run this, it still produces the scatter plot. And if I come to the folder, there it is. And I can open it up like I would any other picture file on my Mac, and it's there. So that's how you can get them out of Jupyter and Python too. Okay, and let's do a couple additional plots, see if we have any strong feelings about this. With someone, like, does anybody really want to do a pie chart or a box plot? What's more important, given that we probably can't do both with the time remaining?
We got 2 for pie chart, 3 for pie chart.
All right, good. I see. Now they're coming. Okay, let's work on the pie then. So we'll come down here, and a pie chart has the exact same layout as the line and the bar, but instead of x-axis and then y-axis, it's what are the categories or the slices, and then the counts for the slices. So we need to get our data in that format again. So let's do it with the class variable. There's a class column. If we, the production table, we can kind of look at it if we want here. Just take a peek. And oh, the first 3 don't really have anything interesting in them. But yeah, there's large, medium, I think small, and then a couple numbers. So let's use that as our high, medium, low. It's something like that. So we'll do our class column, and maybe we just want the count. How many high, how many medium, how many low, and those will become the slices in the chart. Well, who remembers what is we've used it several times now. What's the function that will give us the count of each? Oh, wow, you're all ahead of me. Okay, I see it there in the chat. Good for you. Value underscore counts. That's right. And then we just add dot. What's the thing that comes at the end to get the chart? Dot plot. That's right. And then this time it's kind equals pi instead of bar. And we can give it a size. It might come out, yeah, sometimes it comes out looking a little bit skewed. To fix that, you can give it the option fig size equals 10, 10, like something that's square. And then it'll look a little bit nicer. So that's how you could kind of go through for the pie chart. And again, like if let's say you wanted to see the intermediate step, like you want to see the data that's actually being plotted, you could just grab this part up there and paste it, and you could see the numbers. You could add those numbers as labels too, but that's what I mean by your like layering, right? We produce that first, and then we layer the plot command on top of it to get the plot. Great. And I think I saw a question about NANs. That's like a whole additional seminar. There's so many ways that you can deal with nulls and NANs, and obviously here it's ignoring them. It's just not including them at all, but you can make them not ignored. You can change them if you know what they are. So there's lots of ways to deal with nulls in Python. That's a great question, but too large for now. And then I think that's it, unless we want to go back. I mean, I don't know how much time you are planning on leaving for questions, Lauren.
Let's do a box plot. I think there were some people that wanted it, so we'll get there. Yeah.
We'll get more in there. Great. Obviously, I like box plots a lot. So for a box plot, it's actually plt.boxplot. There's a little bit different syntax. And let's do the list price column again. A box plot is very similar to a histogram. It's got to be a numeric column that you're doing it on. That's the only thing that makes sense. So it's going to be prod list price. And notice the brackets inside the parentheses here. This one has significantly different syntax than the others. And if you run that, you should get a box and whisker plot. Who knows what the dots are? That's right, Bo. Outliers. Yep. So the dots are outliers. So outliers have a mathematical calculation. It's usually 1.5 times the interquartile range above and below the first and third quartiles. So anything outside that range, it'll calculate as an outlier. And then, yeah, if you actually tilt your head, this is like the histogram that we did. Remember the list price histogram was right skewed? If you tilt your head to the left and look at this, you could tell it's right skewed because all those outliers and the whisker are longer to the top or to the right. It's the same exact thing that we did with the histogram, just a different way of looking at it. Good, great. And you could also do side-by-side box plots. Like there's so many options in Python for visualizations. And obviously there's other charts too, bubble plots, I mean, heat maps, anything you can think of. I'll also mention too, before we finish, there are other libraries. One of my favorite libraries is HiCharts. It's kind of like you can use it with anything, not just Python. I think you could use it with R or whatever else, and it just makes really nice visualizations for the web. These are nice too, obviously, but it'll take a lot to make these prettier. The high charts ones kind of come out really nice, but high charts is not free, so it's the downside.
This is great, Barb. Thank you so much for doing this. Oh my gosh, I'm so impressed. This is very cool. Does anyone, before we dive into the pre-submitted question, does anyone have questions about this right now? Or their graphs, or the software, or anything like that? Going once, going twice. Okay, can everyone see my screen again? Barb, can you see my screen again?
Yes, yep.
Okay, cool. So thank you, that was amazing. On top of that demo and that workshop, you guys also submitted some really great questions, and a lot of these kind of tie into a lot of things that Barb was talking about. I know she mentioned, she was touching on one of the questions. So I just want to pop the questions up really quick. Okay, there's one page, and then we're going to dive into them. If you guys have any follow-ups to what we're talking about here, as we've been saying throughout the whole chat, make sure you either type your questions in the chat, or feel free to hop off mute and we can dive through them in person or virtually. But I definitely want to cover some of these because these are really great. So Barb, I've heard of Python being used a lot in the data world. What are some of the most common and unusual use cases of Python you've come across, and when would you recommend using it instead of other languages?
This is a great question. I get this question all of the time, especially do I learn Python or R? And I actually started on R, and I like R, but I still think it's a little bit behind Python for a lot of applications, particularly deploying to the web, which is becoming much more popular now. Now I've heard that they've come out with like a new thing and they're getting better at it, but I think there's a lot more support for Python. There's a lot more documentation. It's a little bit easier to read typically. I will also say Python is they're both very similar, but Python is, I think, even more similar to some of the other languages. So like if you're familiar with JavaScript or something like that, it won't be that bad of a transition, whereas R does have a couple things that are different. So I do tend to recommend Python over R for all of those reasons. The most common use cases, I think, are machine learning, and that I'm familiar with this, but Python can do anything. It can deploy web applications. It can, I'm sure there's somebody I can't even think of, run algorithms. It's not just for math stuff and stat stuff. It's really great. I'm trying to think of the most unusual use of Python. I don't know if I can come up with something off the top of my head for that one, but I hope the rest of it was at least helpful.
We'll just stew on that. If you think of something, obviously let us know. And Christy, actually, this is our next question. Can you recommend a good training course to start learning Python? To Christy's comment in the chat, she's still very green. How can someone, amp up their skills?
So full disclosure, and I said this before, I do teach Python for General Assembly. So General Assembly is one option. Data Camp, though, is another great option. I've done some work with them, and I'm trying to think other places that I might be less familiar with. But I mean, there's so many. Udacity typically has a lot of great options. I don't know if they have a Python specific course. What I would avoid, if it's helpful, is something where it's just like anybody can put something up there. Like, I don't want to say anything that I hate saying something negative, but Udemy tends to be like that, where it's just like, oh, anybody can like put something up there for $10, and it's usually not really like someone's gone through it or whatever. So anything that is at least curated by a professional is probably really good.
That's great. Good to know. Next question. So what are some of the biggest mistakes or stumbles using Python? And what are some great shortcuts or helpful ways to use Python?
Yeah, the the biggest mistakes, and it's so frustrating for people who are just starting, is, like I said, spelling errors. And then you're going through your code, 20 times and thinking, what did I do wrong? Because you always assume it's a Python syntax thing, but usually it's something spelled wrong, or you forgot a semicolon for a for loop, like something really, really small. So that's, and I have it on my to-do list to create a little checklist of these like common errors, but they have them online. Like you could go find, common errors. So you can kind of go down your little checklist and say, did I spell something wrong? Did I forget a semicolon? Get all the small things out of the way first. But the errors in Python are actually pretty helpful. I'd say they're more helpful than SQL errors if you're someone that uses SQL. So that's the good news. And then in terms of shortcuts, the most shortcuts that I know are just within the Jupyter Notebook interface itself, so they don't apply to other editors. But might be able to. I don't know if I have a list of the shortcuts, but I was doing some of them on the. I'll write that down as a to do for a blog post or something and send it out to you guys. But yeah, there are some Jupyter Notebook shortcuts.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a loaded question. So we'll see. How much time does it take to master Python?
Yeah, so it took me a year to learn R when I first started. Like I was, from total scratch. I knew no coding at all. And I don't recall, I think at least for part of that year, I was doing it full time, but not the whole year. But that's how long it took me to really feel good. And I think R is comparable to Python. So, I mean, like, can you become dangerous enough after 6 months? Probably. But like, I didn't really start feeling like confident that I was writing the correct thing and, like doing it quickly. I think it took me about a year. It's not easy. It's much harder than SQL, obviously much harder than Excel. It's like learning a new language.
Good question. I feel like a year too. That's pretty quick. I was kind of expecting like much longer. So I'm impressed. What editor can be used to learn Python? As a beginner, should I focus on Excel or Jupyter Notebooks or Pandas? What should she be using?
I'm wondering if Excel was thrown in here because I did hear that Microsoft is, excuse me, introducing a Python editor in Excel. I don't know if they actually came out with that yet or if this person meant something different, but I think Jupyter Notebooks tend to be the easiest, with the exception of, you remember I mentioned if you run a cell, it is run in the order that you ran it, not in the order it appears in Jupyter, which is very challenging for some people. So if you're someone that might get confused by that, then I would go with PyCharm or Atom or one of the other editors where it just runs the whole thing all at once every time. But if that's something that you think you can handle, Jupyter is a much nicer interface and it's very popular.
Good to know. Okay, so I want to create a portfolio in my Google Drive. How do I transfer my data visualization info from Notebook to Google Drive?
I think we covered that in the lesson, right? You can export as PNG files. You can put entire Jupyter notebooks in Google Drive, just like I did for you guys to download for today. So all of that can go in Google Drive. They're just files.
Awesome. So good to know. Which open source platform do you recommend learning Python on?
I assume this is another editor question. If it's like a, I don't know which ones are free or not in terms of like teaching. Like the ones I mentioned earlier, most of them are not free. But if you mean editors, Jupyter is free, Atom is free, Sublime is free, PyCharm is free. They're almost all free. So I think it's very rare to pay for any kind of editor. So any of those would be fine. Again, it really depends on, maybe I should have demonstrated this better when I was in Jupyter, but like that whole cell thing really throws people off sometimes, like, because they forget that they went back and ran a cell and then they get an error and they're not sure why. So if that's something that would throw you off, I would go towards one of the other ones.
Great. And then this is our last pre-submitted question. So let me switch this screen. If anybody else has any questions, please pop them in the chat now. But what are the most popular Python visualizations that are used by marketing groups? Are there any Python visualization packages that are grouped by business function, i.e. marketing, HR, finance, etc.?
I don't know of any that are specific. And, I think that so there's some types of charts that are like have very specific applications, like for example, time series with finance, like line plots, but it's pretty rare. Like usually almost any visualization can be used for any data set. And we do this in my consulting firm all the time. Like I've taken a wide variety of clients. I've had a lawyer, accounting firms, telecom, HR, marketing, all those things. It's the same charts. It's just making the dashboards. You're crafting a unique dashboard just for what makes sense for that particular application, not necessarily the chart itself. And Lauren, maybe when you're done, I can share my screen and show what I mean. It would also kind of share the high charts thing too. But it's data is data. Like everyone has data. It's usually pretty similar. It's not usually something that like is so specific to an industry that it needs its own package, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to stop sharing and so you can share your screen. And I know, Barb, you want to talk a little bit more about Boxplot too. So I'd love for you to, share some info there as well.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, yes, I guess this fits in at the right time. So this is what I was telling you guys about with high charts. This is what high charts looks like on the web. They're a little bit nicer looking, right, than what we did in the Jupyter notebook. And they're a little bit more interactive, and you could add buttons and change things because it's right on the web. And this is what I was saying with the answer to this person's last question. This is like a marketing application where they wanted to pull their data from the Facebook API because you get much more from the API than you do from like the charts that Facebook gives you and insights. So they had us, pull all 1,800 variables and go through them and say, what's the most important? Are you going to calculate additional fields, which we did for some applications? And then how are you going to turn that into a dashboard where the most important things are up top? And it takes a lot of organization and planning. That's the majority of the work. And data analytics is cleaning and organizing and planning. Making the charts, as you saw, is actually not that bad, but it's picking the right charts for the right applications and making sure you're getting all the information in there in kind of a compact, concise way. All of that is a little bit tougher to do. So yeah, all of these charts can be used for all the different applications of industries. And like I was saying, right, we work with all of these different industries in a consulting fashion. And the other thing I'll mention too about my organization, we are looking to pilot a data chat program with a larger company. So if any of you work with larger companies, I would love to chat with you about the video chat program we're looking to pilot. It would basically allow departments, so like the ones that were in that question, HR, marketing, whoever, to video chat live with an analytics expert when you get stuck on questions like this. So instead of being stuck in Python or Excel for hours and hours, we could get you over the hump on a video chat. The pilot program is free. I'm just looking for someone to test it out. I would be eternally grateful. And then that's it about Boxplot and high charts, and hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, that is incredible. Barb, you are fantastic. This was so awesome to watch and to learn. So again, we have 6 minutes left. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask them now. If not, I'm happy to give everyone 6 minutes back in their day. We plowed through that. So that was really, really helpful. Thank you so much for your time, Barb, and for everyone for participating. This was really great. And like I mentioned, this was kind of the first time we've ever done something like this. I got a few private messages in the chat how amazing this was. So if you liked it, let us know so we can make more chats like this for you guys in the future. And again, just thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And we will see you all back at another chat real soon.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. And sorry, everyone, again about my voice.
Oh my gosh, I hope you feel better, more importantly. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.